Hello. This is meant to be a talk about the age of the earth. I thought I'd start with a brief reading from Book 1 of Genesis. This is the King James Version. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters the seas. And God saw that it was good. Before the 18th century, this account from Genesis, supplemented by readings from ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, more or less determined how Europeans understood the age of the earth. Theologians had attempted to find the exact age of the earth in order to understand a variety of different things about mankind and about Scripture. For example, nailing down the exact dates for various events in the Bible made it possible to understand exactly when the end times mentioned in the book of Revelation would occur, based on the assumption that Christ's life took place at precisely the midpoint of the finite time allotted between God's creation of the world and its eventual destruction. The quest to find the exact age of the earth was sometimes controversial, and scholars never came up with a really precise, universally accepted answer. The most frequently cited date for creation came to be 4004 BCE, or around 6,000 years ago. How could someone make this kind of precise estimate? Well, by looking at Christ's lineage and estimating the lifespan of each of his ancestors. It's not really that precise a number, as each person who made an estimate had made different assumptions about the number of years different biblical figures had lived. This idea of the earth and its age, what we can call the young earth, was the foundation of the notion that all animals and plants had been created at one time in the days following the creation of the earth, and that they remained largely unchanged since then. This dovetailed nicely with the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle's claim that the universe was more or less unchanging, and it fit very well with the geocentric model of the universe, in which the earth was at the center of creation and everything that happened in the universe was part of God's plan for mankind. Animals, plants, humans, rocks, water, everything was tied together in a great chain of being, created by God, all with a purpose, all with a very clear end in mind: divine judgment. There was in this system a firmly religious purpose, and no real distinction was made between scientific knowledge and religious knowledge, as both kinds of inquiry served the same function: to explain God's universe to man. A fair question to ask, though, was this: if God created everything all at once, why do animals look different in Europe than in Africa or the New World? An answer could be found in the work of St. Augustine. St. Augustine had embraced the idea of special creation, the notion that God had placed unique animals in places best suited for them. The system created by the great 18th century taxonomer, Carl Linnaeus, who lived from 1707 to 1788, seemed to confirm special creation as a means to explain why, for example, there were humans with different colors of skin and different eye colors, and why birds on different islands looked different. Linnaeus' system implied the kind of static universe favored by young Earth creationists. All in all, a young Earth and the notion of a static world filled with specially created animals made for a tight, very elegant system to explain the universe. But this explanation only works if the universe is young. The understanding of the universe is only a few thousand years old was the basis for an understanding of geology as well, in which the various features of the Earth and its surface were explained with reference to the act of creation and to events found in the Bible. Mountains and valleys, lakes and oceans, deserts and forests, all of it existed because of specific acts of creation. evidence of catastrophic events in the past, such as deep river gorges cutting through rock, or fossils of sea creatures found on mountaintops, were explained with reference to biblical events, like the Great Flood. Even when the geocentric model of the universe was replaced by a heliocentric one during the scientific revolution, there wasn't much talk about the age of the Earth. Even as some observers began discussing the notion of geologic strata, or layers of different rocks sitting on top of each other, sort of like the ingredients of a sandwich, the idea remained that they had been put down by catastrophes, not by gentle, ordinary processes. After all, if the world was only 6,000 years old, there hadn't been enough time for anything like that to happen. Luminaries such as Isaac Newton, John Locke, and Voltaire were all convinced that the universe had been created as it was by God at a fairly recent date, and that animals and plants hadn't changed much since then. In the 18th century, though, this idea of a young Earth began to be challenged. One of the first to seriously investigate the age of the Earth from a scientific point of view was James Hutton, who lived from 1726 to 1797. He invented and defended what he called the Plutonian explanation for geological formations. Simply put, he wanted to explain why there were river gorges that cut through different strata of rock formations. If the world had been created all at once, why were there rock strata? If it had been created all at once, why were there river gorges that cut through the strata, revealing them and showing that they were different? He posited the idea that Newton's laws of nature had been in effect since the beginning of time and were sufficient to explain natural processes without recourse to miraculous intervention. A river gorge existed, Hutton argued, because the river had eroded away the rock for a very, very long time. It could take thousands, even millions of years for rock formations to erode. It could take thousands, even millions of years for mountain ranges to be formed. If the time frame was shifted from a few thousand years to a few million years, everything from spectacular mountain ranges to elaborate cave networks could be shown to be the result of very slow natural processes. One of his successors, Charles Lyell, who lived from 1797 to 1875, popularized the idea that uniform processes running over long periods of time could explain all the geological diversity we observe in the world. He popularized this in his great work, Principles of Geology, which went through many editions after its first publication in 1830. One of the first authors to apply a longer time frame to animal and plant life was the director of the Royal Gardens in Paris, France, Georges Leclerc, the Count of Buffon, who lived from 1708 to 1788. He used scientific experiment and fossil evidence to argue in print that the Earth had to be tens of thousands of years old, and privately he argued that it was many millions of years old. He added to the notion of an ancient Earth the idea that animals and plants had changed dramatically over the much longer time frame he proposed. He embraced the idea that some animals and plants had in fact become extinct. That is, not all animals and plants present at the creation had survived to the present. Buffon argued, in fact, that plants and animals had evolved and changed over the long time that there had been an Earth. He meant by this that the animals had degenerated over time, had evolved away from their original forms. We can think of one of many examples given by Buffon, that of animals in the horse family. There were, to his knowledge, many creatures that resembled European horses. There were horses, donkeys, zebras, giraffes, and so on. For Buffon, all of these were descended from some kind of common ancestor. Over time, this more perfect ancestor had degenerated as its descendants had come to live in different environments and had adapted to those environments. For Buffon, the diversity we could see in plant and animal life came about over time as organisms reacted to their environments. Removed from the Garden of Eden, they lost their original forms, degenerated, breaking into different subspecies over very long periods of time. His model implied a dynamic universe that changes gradually over very long periods. In in geological terms, as the surface of the Earth changes due to natural processes, and in biological terms, as organisms change to fit the conditions in which they find themselves. This system breaks with the literal sense of the account of creation in Genesis every bit as much as does the geocentric system pioneered by Copernicus and refined and elaborated by Galileo, by Brahe, by Kepler, and by Newton. The scientific revolution had been applied to human society by the great thinkers of the Enlightenment, like John Locke. The work of Hutton, Lyell, and Buffon applied it to nature itself, revealing that nature had a history, and a very long history at that.